Okay, so we're closer than I thought last time. As I was reading them, I realized that these chapters are just a few pages. So he gets back out from the teacher's house and he goes to the station where his bags are and he sleeps there. And he says it wasn't too bad, but then it was like also the most depressing thing. So you don't try it. I mean it. It'll depress you. And then he starts to think about how he reacted to Mr. Antolini. And like I said before, he doesn't he doesn't really think, he thinks he probably overreacted. And so he does clarify that maybe he just likes petting guys' heads. I mean, but I mean, it's Holden is probably like a little boy to Mr. Antolini, and so I don't think there was anything creepy about it. And the more he thinks about it, the more he's kind of embarrassed that he did it, and then he realizes I should have just gone back. But he ran away from that situation. So he leaves Phoebe a note, and it sort of ends on Phoebe, but you can tell it's by the way he's describing New York, it's Christmas time. And that always makes people feel even more lonesome and nostalgic. And so he's really wanting to speak to her, and he tells her, he leaves a note with the secretary. He even talks to the secretary. He tries to talk to anybody he can talk to. And she yells, "Good luck," which is the same thing old Mr. Spencer did, which he says, I hate that. It's depressing. When he gets to the museum, he's early, and some other guys are asking him, "Where's the mummies?" And he shows them where the mummies are, and notice that what he likes about the mummies is that they are able to preserve the bodies, for a long time and protect them from decaying. And so Holden likes this idea because he can't stand the idea of the natural mortality of what happens with the body. But I was also remembering, probably for the first time I've ever made this connection, that was his original paper that Mr. Spencer read, and he tells the boys a little bit more detail than what he says in the paper about, this about the mummies, so it kind of shows you how Holden is one of those students, and I've come across many of them, who really is bright and capable, but either is too much of a procrastinator, which I think is kind of linked to not wanting to move ahead and get to the next. I think sometimes people are even afraid to leave high school because what's next? What's going to happen next? Before that, he says something that's very articulate about what he likes, and I think that you could really point to Salinger here, and what happens to Salinger after this book is out there and it does so well. And he says, what I would love is just to be a deaf mute, and if anybody wanted to talk to me, they'd have to write it on a piece of paper. That's how I would communicate. Now, notice he's been trying to communicate with people this entire time, but the idea of only saying really what is necessary for somebody to know. And then he would find a wife who was also a deaf mute, and they would, they'd have to write things down on a piece of paper. But this is the part I want to read that reminds me of what's happened as Salinger left and as kind of a reclusive person and stayed kind of a hermit in his own quiet wooded community and lived, I would say, probably more like a monk, except for the occasional live-in girlfriend from that point forward. So, he'd find some job like putting changing oil, putting gas in the car. They'd pay me a salary for it and all. And I'd build a little cabin somewhere with the dough I made and live there for the rest of my life. I'd build it right near the woods, but not right in them, because I'd want it to be sunny as hell all the time. I'd cook all my own food. And later on, if I wanted to get married or something, I'd meet this beautiful girl who was also a deaf mute, and we'd get married. She'd come and live in my cabin with me, and if she wanted to say anything to me, she'd have to write it on a goddamn piece of paper like everybody else. If we had any children, we'd hide them somewhere. We could buy them a lot of books and teach them how to read and write ourselves. So this is what he kind of gets excited about thinking about, is just to exist in that kind of world the way that you would in a monastery, where you're making all your own food, growing your own food, and living off the land, and making things as simple as possible so that you can spend more time in prayer and be more in the presence of God, because everything else in this world is a distraction. Even relationships can be a huge distraction from your own personal journey, because they take up all your time and energy, and then you have things like jealousy, and it just, there's a reason why people aren't married when they go to the monastery. So at any rate, so he meets Phoebe, and she's got her suitcase packed, and she's ready to go with him. And this is where you start to see kind of the reversal of Holden. Everybody that's been trying to help him along the way and tell him, no, I know you think that school is full of a bunch of phonies, but you got to go in order to get where you want to go. That at some point you're going to hit whatever it is that you're interested in, and it won't be so bad, but you got to go through this pain first. And we all have to go through a certain amount of pain and discomfort. And a lot of times that's what kind of teaches us what it is that we truly are supposed to do, what we want to strive for. So by telling her she's got to go back to school, and what about that play you want to be in? You don't want to miss the play, do you? And I think the play is sort of symbolic of missing out on life, on the good stuff, and you can't just run away from it. And so, she gets upset with him, and he has to play the adult here. So they compromise. Back then, I guess you could just walk home for lunch, and then come back. And so he says she doesn't have to go back that day, and he takes her to the zoo. And there's a key part about the zoo, and that is, again, when he's playing this parent, she wants him to go, and he says, I'll watch you, okay? I went over and I sat down on the bench, and she went and got on the carousel. She walked all around it. I mean, she walked once all the way around it. Then she sat down in this big brown beat-up looking old horse, and the carousel started, and I watched her go round and round. There were only about 5 or 6 kids on the ride, and the song on the carousel was playing Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. It was playing it very jazzy and funny. All the kids kept trying to grab for the gold ring, and so was old Phoebe, and I sort of was afraid she'd fall off the goddamn horse, but I didn't say anything or do anything. The thing with kids is, if they want to grab for a gold ring, you have to let them do it and not say anything. If they fall off, they fall off, but it's bad if you say anything to them. And I think this is kind of a message more for parents about raising your kids and trying to dictate, as somebody like in Holden's position who has his money and is going to prep school, what you need to be in life, which would be something like a doctor or a lawyer. And a lot of times people discourage their kids from wanting to be actors or whatever, writers, because it's a good chance you won't make it. But that's not a good enough reason not to go for it. And if they fall off the horse, they fall off the horse. So he's looking at it as this reversal. He's looking at it from a parent's point of view, and how scary it is to have to watch your kids go through the pain of possibly failing and finding out that life isn't what you thought it was going to be. But what can you say to them? There's nothing you can say. We all have to kind of figure it out for ourselves. And even though she's doing something that seems to be dangerous, he has to just let it go and let her try it, let her do it. And so there's this faith that I think he's trying to communicate, that you have to, part of that is letting go of your own ideas and yourself, and having faith that it's going to be okay. Just sort of like having faith that the ducks are going to be okay as well. And so I think that the way that it's ending, and it starts to rain, and he keeps watching her, and he's already made up his mind he'll go back home. And so the whole idea of running away is off, and so that he can let Phoebe get that out of her head as well. And then he says, man, it rained like a bastard in buckets. I swear to God, all the parents and mothers and everybody went and stood under the roof of the carousel so they wouldn't get soaked to the skin or anything. But I stuck around on the bench for quite a while. I got pretty soaking wet, especially my neck, my pants. My hunting hat really gave me quite a lot of protection in a way, but I got soaked anyhow. I didn't care though. I felt so damn happy all of a sudden. The way old Phoebe kept going round and round, I was damn near bawling. I felt so damn happy, if you want to know the truth. I don't know why. It was just that she looked so damn nice. The way she kept going around and around in her blue coat and all. God, I wish you could have been there. And I think he's speaking to Allie. He speaks to Allie, of course, throughout, where he just, usually it's when he's really distraught, but the whole time he's kind of communicating this letter to him. I wish you could have been there. I wish you could have seen her. And the thing is, it's kind of like he's finally pausing for a minute and enjoying the good things of life, instead of, just as Phoebe points out to him, you're always pointing out everything bad. Give me one good thing. And one good thing that you're like is also communicating, tell me something you're grateful for. Tell me you've got something, and he knows, oh, I have you. And so it's that connection at the end. But I think this is also interesting that he ends with his story saying, DB wanted to know everything that was going on, and you can tell his brother's very concerned about him. He does go to a psychoanalysis. He's been talking this through as if he's been talking to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist keeps asking him, so when you go to school in the fall, you're going to apply yourself. And he said, how do I know what I'm going to do when I get there? But you can kind of tell that he's maybe turned a corner through this experience. They're being kind of cold and wet and out in the worst storm. That's the storm, the symbolic storm of his life. And no matter how bad he thinks his parents are going to handle it, it's still better than sleeping in the subway, and there are reasons to live. But the communication thing that I think is kind of ironic because of Salinger not wanting to talk about this book and kind of running away from it, is he says, I'm sorry I told so many people about it. And I'm sorry I opened, Pandora's box here. All I know is I sort of miss everybody. Everyone that he talks about he couldn't stand. And he even says he even missed Maurice. Even him. And so you can see that there's this redemption in the time that he's grown up. It's what's suggested by Wordsworth as a recompense. When he says, in Tintern Abbey, is one of my favorite poems, if you want to look at it. It's all about romanticism, and really romanticism has a lot to do with growing up. And he's, as a boy, he'd run through nature and he didn't appreciate it. He was very careless and reckless, and these aching pains and dizzy raptures of growing up all kind of come to a sober pleasure. At some point, it's a sober pleasure to watch Phoebe just go round and round in the carousel. And as you get older and you have kids, and especially even when you have grandkids, those little pleasures get better. And because you realize, the moment and the time. And that's what Wordsworth says is the recompense, is being able to hear the still sad music of humanity. And it's worth sticking around for. So anyways, I'm going to end there, but I do want to go back to that Q3 question. If you're interested, I'm going to be working on Jude the Obscure, just to kind of point to the Q3 question on this. Thomas Hardy had kind of the same problem as these other authors like Melville and Fitzgerald. Jude the Obscure is absolutely his best work, and he called it a miserable accomplishment. Why? Because it was burned by the bishop, and he actually stopped writing after that and just turned to poetry, because he really couldn't be as honest as he wanted to be. So that's going to take me a while to get through, but it's definitely going to be worth your time if you like these videos. So at any rate, so going back to the definition of madness, and notice that in the prompt they use the word divine. I think that typically the way they write the Q3 question, it is trying to give you some hint of what direction to take and what to do. That's not to say that you should start your essay going back over the quote that they lent you, because that's kind of cheating in a way. That's not really, it's showing that I need a formula, and you don't. But that word could spark something, because here's the juxtaposition. Is it crazy or is it divine? And so even though this is seen, even in its day when he was trying to publish this, people, you know, who should know better, they have so much experience in literature, they were like, is Holden crazy? So that really irritated him. So I'm just going to show you my claim, as I call it, because I want to make some kind of argument here. Okay, so remember I said you have to have like a literary, at least one literary device in the Q3 as well. So I'm just going to use Holden's voice. I wanted to do narrative style, but if I'm talking about narrative style, I'm talking about Salinger, and that would have made it more complicated. So Holden Caulfield's voice in Catcher in the Rye has often been taken too literally and misunderstood as mere madness. However, Caulfield's renunciation, detachment, and exile from the world leads him and his reader into more of a spiritual journey in spite of his language and attitude, which critics, phonies, have also deemed inappropriate as well as insane. So just a trick in writing here. You know, when you want to write something in parentheses, it's not really acceptable in an essay to write things in parentheses, but it works just the same way if you put it in a dash. So, and it looks like you're using a different style in your writing, so that looks good. So now all my examples here are going to be taking the little things like the nun, or James Castle committing suicide, and as kind of a double, which is going to talk about how he kind of gave in, not decided like Holden to live. And if you go back, I didn't read this quote, but there's something I forgot to mention that I do want to go back to. The teacher says to him, the mark of the immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause, while the mark of the mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one. And that's really what Salinger's trying to do, and ultimately what Holden is trying to do, to live without ego. And if you read Franny and Zooey, it's pretty much the same theme, except they're talking about it in terms of acting. And that's a really hard thing to do, because acting is an art. But at the same time, anything that you really want to do, like writing or acting, you kind of have to have a pretty big ego to think you're going to do it. And so it is, and I think that was something with Salinger, that it is a great struggle. So being able to renounce the world, or like, you know, like I mentioned that book, The Way of the Pilgrim, being able to live somewhat in this world and yet in another, and to be kind of between both, not where the world is much too with you, as Wordsworth would put it, but to be able to function and not be so affected by everything else that is really insane. You know, to be the sane one, which you will probably be accused of being insane if you're not like everybody else, right? So, anyways, I hope you get something out of that, and I hope you can take what I'm saying as you read other novels and start looking more deeply into it for yourself, because you will. This is how you learn to do it yourself. All right, thank you.